Hello, Richmond, Virginia. That's Shockoe Bottom you just looked at there, a very cool city, the capital of the Confederacy. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cancels a planned diplomatic trip to the United States after the U.S. refused to veto a United Nations resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza during Ramadan. That resolution ended up passing by 14 votes to none. It calls for the immediate release of all hostages. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby even saying the U.S.'s abstention doesn't represent a change in policy, but, quote, the reason we abstained is because this resolution text did not condemn Hamas, and we really believe that Hamas should be condemned for what they did on the 7th of October. Well, in confirming the cancellation of the diplomatic trip to the United States, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says, in light of the change in the American position, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided the delegation would not leave. Joining me live now to discuss this is the Vice Chair for Virginia's Israel Advisory Board and the President of Richmond's only Orthodox synagogue, Chuck Lessin. Chuck, good morning. Or good afternoon, as it is your time. I'm sorry.
Afternoon.
Right. So let's talk about this. It seems to me understandable that Prime Minister Netanyahu would say, you know what, I'm not coming because you didn't support us in front of the United Nations.
Well, I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu's position was clear. The United States promised a certain position from the outset of the carnage inflicted on its citizens on October the 7th. The U.S. stood firm with Israel and said there would be no ceasefire unless the hostages were released. And we broke with that policy, contrary to what John Kirby and others have said. We have now broken with that policy as we abstained from that UN resolution of last week. Prime Minister Netanyahu is obviously upset and concerned because this abstention really gives hope to Hamas. I mean, you can read all sorts of news reports and see after the UN vote, Hamas was applauding. And of course they should be, because the U.S. has now shown a weakened hand, and that is encouraging to our enemies and certainly Israel's enemies.
How concerned are you about, and I'm describing it as an eroding relationship between Israel and the United States. How do you see the relationship, and how concerned are you about the long-term relationship?
I am always hopeful and convinced that the United States and Israel have a firm commitment to one another. Friends can have disagreements, but I am absolutely confident that once the Democrat Party figures out how to deal with their far left progressive base, you will then see the mainstream Democrat Party probably come back in line, join with the Republicans, and make it clear that the U.S. population should be reflective of our political votes and that we are firmly behind our greatest ally, Israel.
So words are powerful, and you said that friends can disagree. Friends can have disagreement, but also part of friendship is respect. And it seems that the United States has showed somewhat of a lack of respect in dealing with Israel, particularly since October 7th, in that it is almost prescribed to Israel how to handle itself. How do you see that?
Well, I would agree with you. I think it is disrespectful, but life can be complicated. We are also a very generous donor of arms to Israel and funds to Israel. Certainly that benefits the United States as well as Israel, but it's a complicated equation. It's not so simple as to say that one side gets to have it all their way or the other. But in this case, with the carnage, the barbaric carnage that was inflicted on October the 7th, I would have expected the U.S. position to remain firm and strong and behind Israel so that the message can be sent to not just Israel's enemy, Hamas, but the world's enemy, Iran, and all of its proxies. We should have stayed firm. We need to get back to that position. And again, I am confident that we will.
I love your diplomacy. I truly appreciate it. I do. So talk about, in terms of diplomacy, talk about the world's response. And when I say the world, let's just talk about the United Nations specifically. Do you feel like the United Nations has been a bit too soft or too supportive, sensitive to Hamas as opposed to Israel?
Well, I think if you are a student of history and you want to read even a cursory look at what the UN's positions have been regarding Israel since 1948, when Israel became a modern state, you will see that the UN has always had a double standard when it comes to Israel. If any other country in the world were attacked on October the 7th or any other day in the way that Hamas attacked innocent Israeli civilians, the UN, there would have been an outpouring from that body condemning and demanding the release of the hostages. But the UN has always shown a double standard when it comes to Israel. And I'm afraid that there are many, many reasons, maybe reasons that would take too long to explain in this segment, but it is a tremendous show of anti-Semitism and a lack of respect for the Israeli people and the challenges that they face, really being surrounded by people that want them in the sea and out of Israel, and yet the UN wants a two-state solution and kumbaya and a ceasefire. The UN has not, again, done a very good job being even-handed.
At this point, talking about a two-state solution, isn't that too advanced of a conversation? Isn't that a conversation that needs to be had at a later date? It seems to me that right now, fundamentally, this is about security of Gaza and security specifically of Israel.
I would agree with that. I would also say that we've lived a two-state solution since 2005, when the Israelis unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, and then a year or so later, they elected Hamas to be their political leadership. That was nearly 20 years of a two-state solution. And by the way, as the Israelis withdrew in 2005, the Palestinians and Hamas were firing rockets into Israel on that very day. So that is a visible sign of what the Hamas leadership and the Palestinian people think of a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. Only the Palestinians and no Jews in Israel.
Unfortunately, the one state right now is a state of emergency. Chuck, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for the conversation.
A pleasure.
All right. Coming up after the break, the search continues for the 6 people who fell into the Patapsco River when Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge came crashing down. We're continuing to update the recovery efforts as well as all 6 who are presumed dead. All of that coming up in the latest on the investigation.